Hello, everyone. My name is James Richard, and I'd like to welcome y'all to a very special episode of Books I've Never Read, the podcast where I sit down and I talk with someone about one of their favorite books that I have not read before. My guest today is my mom, and we are going to be talking about Joan Didion and her book, The Year of Magical Thinking. And if you don't know who Joan Didion is, I suggest that you familiarize yourself with her work through either one of her memoirs or novels or any of her numerous essays. There's also an excellent documentary about her life on Netflix called The Center Will Not Hold, and I really can't recommend it enough. It is a phenomenal story. I'd like to thank y'all for listening. If you want to talk about this book or any book, or you want to yell at me on the internet, you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at @ajamesrichard. That is at @ajamesrichard on Instagram and Twitter. Thank you so much, and I really hope you enjoy this conversation. Give me one more. Can you hear me now?
Can you hear me now?
Looks like it's going to be a yes.
Okay.
So as long as you don't move any closer. Just joking. You can feel free to move as much as you want.
Breathe.
All right. I guess we will start now. Mom.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you. Thank you for agreeing to do this. So this is the first nonfiction book that I'm doing. So in the last couple episodes, we've just gone through the book from start to finish. But I think for this one, I'm just going to lay out the premise for the listeners, and then we can just get into it. So we're doing The Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Didion. It's about the sudden death of her husband, author John Gregory Dunn, in 2003. I read a short excerpt on her website, and this is how she describes the book. Quote, "This is my attempt to make sense of the period that followed, weeks and then months that cut loose any fixed idea I ever had about death, about illness, about probability and luck, about good fortune and bad, about marriage and children and memory, about grief, about the ways in which people do and do not deal with the fact that life ends, about the shallowness of sanity, and about life itself." And yeah, I think that summed it up pretty well. So as you can see, this is not going to be a lighthearted episode.
No, not at all.
So when I asked you to do this, this was one of the first books you came up with. Why this book?
Well, I guess for the obvious reason that you would understand, maybe your listeners who aren't aware that your father died suddenly in 1998 of a massive heart attack. So he was much younger than Joan Didion's husband. Still, there are a lot of parallels in the experience. I originally listened to this book on audio in 2006. It was published in 2005. I bought it to listen to on vacation, which sounds strange, but I can't read on the plane because it makes me sick. So audiobooks have since become one of my favorite ways of reading. And I am a big fan of nonfiction. I read a lot of fiction when I was younger. I think that as an adult, I find real life, I don't know if I would say more interesting, but it's what I'm drawn to. So I listened to the book. I liked it so well that I bought a hardcover copy of it, read it, and in preparation for this have been listening to the audio version again. What I like, clearly Joan Didion is a talented writer. She wrote fiction and nonfiction. I think her description of what were the words you used in the beginning about sanity?
The shallowness of sanity.
The shallowness of sanity. That's perfect. It is all of the things that you question when you go through an experience like that. Her experience, in one line, she says, "Grief, when it comes, is nothing we expect it to be. So true. She, in the beginning, is comparing this to losing her parents, and it just doesn't compare. So the book starts out with, on December 30th, 2003, when she and her husband, after visiting their adult daughter, Quintana Rue, who is in a medically induced coma in the hospital with sepsis from, I believe, what started out like as influenza.
Yes,
and just progressively turned into pneumonia and got worse. And they came home from the hospital. She talks about, I'm going to quote her book here. "We had discussed whether to go out for dinner or to eat in. I said I would build a fire we could eat in. I have no memory of what we meant to eat. I do remember throwing out whatever was on the plates in the kitchen when I came home from New York Hospital. You sit down to dinner and life as you know it ends, in a heartbeat or the absence of one." So she just writes so clearly about the bizarre thoughts that enter your head. Her head, she talks about thinking that she needs to be present for the autopsy.
That's what that's what the magical thinking. That's
right.
Like what that means.
That's what it means. Yeah.
Which is like, I've pulled out a definition of it. It's thinking that if a person hopes for something enough or performs the right actions, that an unavoidable event can be averted. And one of the things that I loved is that she keeps mentioning that she couldn't give away her husband's shoes after he died, because what if he came back? What if he came back? And that's a thought that you think.
Absolutely.
Like
and she several times in the book mentions that she has thoughts of when he will come back, not if he will come back, but there
when.
Is a part of her in her mind thinking that he will come back. I lost my train of thought there. She is, let's see, we'll give you a little, I guess, backstory on Joan. Didion was born in 1934 in Sacramento. An interesting fact in the Netflix documentary about her was that she grew up hearing stories about the Donner Party. That her ancestors or her family had been traveling west with the Donner Party, and when the Donner Party decided to go on an uncharted route,
right,
their family split up.
We all know what happened.
And we all know how that story ended.
That ended for them.
But how that may have shaped her writing, who knows? Says that the documentary says that she started writing at age 5. Got her first notebook from her mother and started writing stories at age 5, which is pretty incredible. This book I read, she completed the manuscript in 88 days.
For this book.
Which is pretty incredible.
That is, yeah. And she wrote it, she said it came out within a year of his death. Yes. Which is just insane to me.
During the entire time she is dealing with the loss of her husband, her daughter is critically ill for the first few months after he dies. I believe it was 3 months before they could even hold a funeral for him.
They wouldn't have a funeral without
they
her
waited
daughter
until
there.
Her daughter Quintana was well enough to attend his funeral. And shortly after her recovery from that, she had another serious injury. And
yeah, she fell at a airport in Los Angeles. She was going back to Los Angeles.
Right.
And fell and had a brain aneurysm, and then just was in the hospital for the rest of her life and died of pancreatitis.
She did, and Joan writes about that in the book Blue Nights that she wrote after Quintana died. So, just Yeah, it's really horribly sad. She and her husband, John, had, I feel like, led a really interesting life. They were in California at a time when there was a lot going on. They were part of she had become well-known, I don't know if both of them, I guess you would say, were well-known writers and traveled in a celebrity kind of...
Right, they were a big part of the sort of countercultural movement. Right. And, she wrote a lot about Haight-Ashbury in the late 60s and the early 70s. And
she talks about how she doesn't... in the documentary, she mentions that she didn't know what falling in love wasn't part of her vocabulary. It wasn't a way that she knew. When she met John when she was working she worked for Vogue magazine after she graduated from Berkeley. And John was working for Time magazine at the time. And she just said that she liked being a couple. And she knew when she met him that she wanted that to continue. So they were married in 1964. There's a passage in the book later on where she says John is rereading a section of her book, A Book of Common Prayer. He was rereading it to see how something worked out technically. The sequence he read out loud was one in which Charlotte Douglas's husband Leonard pays a visit to the narrator, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it kind of goes on. And she says, the sequence is complicated. This was, in fact, the sequence John had meant to reread and see how it worked out technically. And then she says, God damn, John said to me when he closed the book, don't ever tell me you can't write. That's my birthday present to you. I remember tears coming to my eyes. I feel them now. In retrospect, this had been my omen, my message, the early snowfall, the birthday present no one else could give me. He had 25 nights left to live. Yeah. So theirs was an intense relationship, as most relationships are intense, but I think two creative minds living together and working together.
Right, they wrote a lot together. They edited all of each other's work.
All of each other's work when they had a routine when they lived in California where they got up and wrote for a certain amount of time, and there was a BBC series that they liked to watch in the afternoon, and then they would go swim in the pool and sometimes be reading books in the pool. And, she talks a lot about building fires. Building fires were that was, an everyday part of their life, part of their ritual. Fires and cocktails and going out to dinner. And they had a home or apartment in New York City, and in fact, he had some health problems, had some heart problems, and was diagnosed with a blockage in what they call I don't have the exact name, but it is what they call the widowmaker. So it was caught early enough, and he had a pacemaker. So she does talk at one point in the book about how he more and more wanted to live in New York and less in California, which she didn't really understand, but attributed to his health declining. Mm-hmm. He didn't want to drive anymore, and
he wanted to be able to walk.
He wanted to be able to walk. Maybe be close to medical facilities. I don't know. So,
which that reminds me of before we started recording this, and we were talking about this earlier. You were talking about she talks a lot about when you're going through the grieving process, you start to really, you go down a lot of rabbit holes, and most of them don't take you anywhere good, but you start to think a lot of like these sort of like what if things, and you start to pull these different these pieces of the past, where it's like we were talking earlier, like if you go back in time and you change one thing, you completely radically alter the course of history.
Yeah, she does. And speaking of rabbit holes, that's the rabbit hole I was trying to go down and lost my train of thought. But she tells the story of John being in the late 80s, John being in New York City for something, and Quintana was off at school, and she was at their home in California by herself when she saw red lights coming through the window and a ambulance and police car across the street, and she called John, and it turns out that the neighbor, she found out the next day that the neighbor across the street had died. And in some twisted way in her mind, she starts to wonder if he wanted to live in New York at that time and she still wanted to be in California, if she had made the decision right then to go to New York, if, that would have changed the outcome of things, if just what we were talking about, if you would have, sold the house that year and moved, if you would have gone right instead of going left on this, I can only imagine in circumstances where you lose someone in an accident you would just carry that with you for the rest of your life. Like, What if I had bought, what if I hadn't asked them to visit if they died in a plane crash, or what if,
what if we had left 5 minutes later?
What if we had left 5 minutes later
before?
Yeah. Right.
What if I didn't need to stop at the store that day?
Yeah. So she talks a lot in Magical Thinking about the tricks that grief plays on you.
I think it can kind of make you see things that weren't there too.
Right.
It makes, like, I think I read like a summary of it where she says that fleeting memories of events and persistent snippets of past conversations with John now took on a new significance. So you start to create these situations out of...
Oh, certainly. Go back, and she talks about going back to replay arguments and times when she shut him out, gave him the cold shoulder,
Like you do when you're in a relationship.
Going back and going over everything that she felt, she had done wrong, or everything that she felt guilty about. She questions her faith. So she says, I realized that I never believed in the words I had learned as a child. In order to be confirmed as an Episcopalian, I believe in the Holy Ghost, the Holy Catholic Church, the communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body, and life everlasting. Amen. I did not believe in the resurrection of the body, nor had my Catholic husband.
That's interesting, because there was a part when I watched that documentary, I think it's called The Center Will Not Hold,
right,
on Netflix, about her life, which is great. Whoever's listening, you should watch it. It was excellent.
Yeah.
But they're interviewing, I think his name's David Hare, and he's the playwright who actually, they turned this into a play.
I know.
This
I would
book,
have. Yeah,
which
I would have loved
can't
to see.
imagine.
Right. Yeah.
What it's like, but they turned it into a play, and he said, which I thought I hadn't really thought of before, that this is the first book about grief that I've ever read that was not by a believer. Like, it's not, and that perspective is very much needed for a lot of people. I feel like,
absolutely,
like when Dad died, I certainly read a lot of books about grief. I'm sure you read even more
I did.
books about grief.
I did.
Almost all of them were religious in some way. That's the only way you're really taught to kind of handle those feelings and
I felt like they were religious or they were clinical. They were either religious, hold on to your faith. One day you'll see your loved one again. And I'm not downplaying. I grew up in the Methodist church and would still consider myself Christian/spiritual person. I believe that there's something beyond this world, but I also wanted to read something at that time to know I wasn't losing my mind. This would have been a good book to read at that time.
Right.
It was a few years later when I read it. It was reassuring and is still reassuring to me now when I read it because grief is sneaky. You just don't know when it's going to sneak up on you. And it does mess with your mind just beyond that passage that we just talked about, where she says she doesn't believe in the resurrection of the body. She says, I did not believe in the resurrection of the body, but I still believed that given the right circumstances, he would come back.
Which is why she couldn't get rid of his shoes. Or right. I think she also said for a long time didn't want to leave New York because what if she wasn't there and that's when he decided to come back?
Right.
Like, what if I'm not in the right place at the right time when he does decide to come back?
She talks about how I began carrying identification when I walked in Central Park in the morning in case it happened to me. If the telephone rang when I was in the shower, I no longer answered it to avoid falling dead on the tile. I mean, I have a very clear memory of you being with me at Farmer Jack grocery store when I had to leave the cart full of groceries and walk out of the store because I had a panic attack. Mm-hmm. It was so bad. And I would say that for the first probably 4 years after your dad died, at least once a year, I was in the hospital thinking I was having a heart attack.
Yeah.
So I get that.
No, there was like a long time, not a long time, but there was quite a few years right after he died, where if you were ever late coming home, I just thought you were dead.
Right.
And I still think that about most people that I love.
I do too. I do assume that if you or your brother or sister don't respond to my text or for a long period of time that something horrible has happened. Especially if you're away on vacation.
And I know it's irrational and I can tell myself that it's irrational, but it doesn't stop that from happening.
It's very real. It's very real at the time.
And I think that's just, I guess is one of the things that grief does to you.
Yeah.
One of, I guess, the many ways
right.
that it changes you.
Yeah, I mean, I just think she weaves together her experience with, as a writer, her natural reaction to this, what was happening to her mind was to research grief. Mm-hmm. So, she quotes some more clinical books throughout, and she's also dealing every day with Quintana's illness, and she is keeping meticulous notes about doctor visits and which I can't even. Yeah, I mean, I can't, but I can in a sense that has been my experience that no one dies at a convenient time.
No.
It certainly was not convenient for your dad to die at age 36 with a young family. It was not convenient when my mother died at, a week before Christmas, or was, mm-hmm. hospitalized a week before Christmas and died a couple weeks after Christmas. And she addresses that. She talks about her parents. Her father died in his 50s. Her mother lived to be 90, but which your Uncle Rich and I talked about, that no matter how old you are when your parent dies, you feel like an orphan.
Right.
So
It brings you
real.
back to kind of being a child.
It does. It does. It takes away that. It makes you realize you just really have to be an adult now. It's on you.
That's so true. I was talking to Liz about that yesterday. How when we're like around, I always refer to like someone else as like a senior adult. Like, I'm looking for like a senior adult. Just please, someone that's like maybe 10 or 20 years older than me that can take charge of this situation.
Yeah, right. Your Uncle Rich and I talk about how we are now that, the age or older than our aunts and uncles were growing up. That means that we are the senior adults now. We're the senior adults now. So it's just, I think it's beautifully written. I think that, of course it's a sad subject, but if you've lost someone close to you, you're going to find some comfort in it, and it's a good read. And if you haven't, you're going to.
Yeah.
At some point.
It's something that everyone is going to...
It's something that everyone is going to experience in their life.
Go through. No, and there's a quote I found from it, because I haven't read it yet. I'm going to, though, and cry a lot, probably. But there's a quote where she kind of like describes what grief is, and it's like one of the best ways I've ever seen it written. And it's, nor can we know ahead of the fact, and here lies the heart of the difference between grief as we imagine it and grief as it is, the unending absence that follows, the void, the very opposite of meaning, the relentless succession of moments during which we confront the experience of meaninglessness itself. And that just like, that really hit me when I read that, because it's not... And there's another quote where she says, one, a single person is missing for you, but the whole world feels empty. And that's so true.
Oh, it is.
And that
true.
lasts for a long time, because if, you're if I'm a kid and my dad dies, when I go back to school, everyone is very sad for me, but I am sad for months. And their life just goes on normal, and life is just normal, but for me, it's not. Oh,
and much of it quickly becomes meaningless.
Yeah.
Much of it quickly.
Everything, like the little things, you're just like, I don't want to hear about your problems. Just like, shut up. It's not like, there are more important things that are going on. And also that when this happens, these things, it changes your life in an instant. And you think it's going to feel really big, but it's so ordinary feeling that it's bizarre.
Right.
Just like the sort of, I don't know. Like you think like time should stop because it's such a big deal.
Right.
But then it's like, oh, shit, like I gotta call work now, and I
still have to get kids ready for school. I still have to do laundry.
Like you said, there's no convenient time to die.
No,
for anyone.
No.
But life just like doesn't stop, and it's ordinary to everyone else but you.
But you.
And it will never be ordinary for you again.
No.
I feel like it's like the point of the sort of experience of like what meaning. Not the meaninglessness of life, but I guess kind of the meaning. Not, I don't mean that in like life is meaningless, but I mean like at the end of the day,
at the same time that you feel this gigantic void in your life, you are also feel incredibly small, because you realize that this person who died and left this huge void in your life is just... And it's not that he's not important and wasn't, or he or she loved by many people. It's that, like you said, the world is going to go on, and you realize for all of us, one day we're not going to be here, but the world will
just continue to go on.
The world will continue to go on.
As it always
But
has.
For sure, somebody told me at the time, or I read at the time, that kind of death divides your life into before and after.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
I think she's clear and says that in much greater detail and much more beautifully. But it's basically what it is, that life she says, you sit down for dinner and life as you know.
Yeah. And there's something you said it makes you feel like small. And there was a quote from her I read, which was similar. And she said it makes her feel invisible.
Yes.
And it's these people who have lost someone look naked because they think themselves invisible. I myself felt invisible for a period of time, incorporeal. I seem to have crossed one of those legendary rivers that divide the living from the dead, entered a place in which I can only be seen by those who themselves recently bereaved.
That is true, because people are very, very much afraid of grieving people because it reminds them of their own mortality.
And the only people that can, is people that know.
Yeah.
People that know, like, you know.
People that have experienced it know. People that haven't are just so afraid of it that...
Like, I've met a few people in my life that, you know, have also, you know, they're like, oh, my dad died when I was 12, or my dad died when I was 18 or 20. But it's like a little club. It's like something that you get.
Right.
And I know that it's infinitely different, losing like a spouse, but...
Sure, it was different. I mean, you know, experiencing losing my mother at 30 and experiencing losing your dad at 34 were two just dramatic losses and voids in my life, but were dramatically different.
Did you feel like the grieving was different?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think with your dad, I realized more how personal grief is, how, especially having children, each one of you, it was just so different for each one of you. And my grief was different from your grief.
Right.
And
but
your grief was different
you
than... You
have to grieve, but also you have to try to carry us through our...
Sure, which I guess, I mean, I think in some ways kept me, you know, probably helped keep me sane too, was the routine of having to get up and get kids off to school and do laundry and do all of those things kept me from...
You have to keep going.
You have to keep going.
When she's, you know, writing this book and grieving, but she's taking care of her child who is really sick at the time.
She's managing Quintana. At some point, she starts to write again.
Yeah.
You know, she starts to write again, and she talks about that and how hard it is. But every turn she makes and everything she does reminds her of him and brings back a memory of him. And I mean, that's true for anybody in the throes of, especially the first year. And I like that she has gone through the first year, because I do feel like that is the worst. That year is filled with a year of horrible firsts. I don't know how else to describe it. No, it's a year of first time, you know.
First, you have all these holidays, Christmases, birthdays.
Yeah.
And then you sort of get that first, like once you kind of hit the anniversary of the death.
Right.
And then you go through the first one of those, and then that becomes its own weird marker.
It's still a weird marker in our family.
Today. Yeah.
In our family today. Then you start to, your family starts to, or you yourself, I think, start to, you know, make changes and, I don't know, create new, different traditions to, I think, make that less painful.
Yeah.
You feel, my heart breaks for her when I read this because of the length of time that they had been together and the age that she was, thinking just how much harder I feel like that whole process would be at that age, and then knowing also that her daughter, knowing that she's going to lose her only child.
Right.
So...
she talks about that like coming up to it being a year since it happened, and how that, I don't know if she said it scared her or made her nervous, or it changes it, because then it's been more than a year. It's like, oh, because then it becomes something that happened years ago, as opposed to something that you're still I don't know, socially acceptable to be dealing, like, at what point can you, like, continue to just, like, be like, well, my husband died? Because once it's been 3 or 4 years, like, other people aren't going to give you the sort of same considerations.
No, I think that's true. Yeah, for sure.
That change. And I mean, certainly I feel different about, it's been 21 years now since,
right.
Jesus, it's been 21 years now since, when Dad died. I certainly feel different about it now than I did at 10 years. And
right, you are almost as old as I am, or you are almost as old as I was when your dad died, right now, which is crazy to think about.
Yeah.
But
and I'm double the age that I was, more than
right.
I was 11. I'm 33 now. Yeah. So I've lived 2 more of those. The life that I had lived up to then, I've lived twice since then.
Right. That was a marker for me. I felt like I'd met your dad at 17, spent 17 years with him. I was 34 when he died. And when that next 17 years, after that next 17 years passed, it was a, I don't know, weird kind of, marker for me too.
I felt that it was like when I turned 23, because then I had officially lived more of my life.
More of your life without him.
Than with him.
Right. Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah, I think you carry that, like, turning 36 will be weird. I think for me, my mom was 59 when she died. Mm-hmm. Certainly for me, turning 36 was weird.
Yeah.
It's grief is just, it's messy. It's messy, and it is sneaky. There's still times when it's just washes over me like a wave, and I didn't see it coming. So in some strange conversation or moment, or
we'll just bring back
snap back a flood of memories and sadness or joy. I mean, having a grandchild now, and like I said, I think it's a great book. I think her writing is beautiful. I'd like to go back and read more. I read Blue Nights after it came out. I read A Book of Common Prayer, but Slouching Towards Bethlehem.
Yeah, that I wanted to read. I'm going to read this one. I think she wrote a book about Dick Cheney because she hated him. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting too that she was one of the.
She's objectively a terrible human. I just want to put that into the vocal record.
She was one of the first people to write about the Central Park Five and how they were. She felt like they were.
Yeah, that story immediately didn't make sense to her.
Right.
Just the visceral kind of reaction to it.
Yeah. So I think that's probably a good place to wrap it up.
Yeah. You would definitely recommend this book?
I would highly recommend this book. I would highly recommend Blue Nights, too. I don't feel like you would want to do another whole podcast about Blue Nights, but it is a story about something that I hope I never have to experience in my life, losing a child, and for her it was a tremendous amount of loss in a short period of time. So, yeah, super talented. Thank you for letting me talk about one of my favorite books.
This was really fun. Is there you read any other books right now? Anything? I just
finished Wildly Different, comedian Pete Holmes. I'd been on a kick of mostly audiobooks written by comedians. So
good call. That definitely balances out like this sort of heaviness.
Definitely balances it out. Yeah. I'm going to make sure I give Pete Holmes the right credit here. Pete
Holmes, if you're listening, big fan of the podcast.
That's right. Comedy, Sex, God.
All right.
That's the book I just finished. And I would also recommend.
Okay.
So it's a fun read.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
This was a lot of fun. I love you.
I love you too.
All right.